Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. So a few days ago I made a video talking about power creep in Age of Empires 2 and I highlighted a few potentially troublesome trends of certain civilizations getting access to units that get their bonuses or some techs stacked on that unit without having any techs missing from the blacksmith or any other inherent disadvantages, making certain units way too powerful. And I think I brought up some decent points and the discussion around the video was quite solid overall, and I was even pleasantly surprised to see some of that discussion go over to Reddit as well. So I thank the guys on Reddit for watching the video and linking it, and then the discussion there was actually very solid and very constructive. And one comment definitely caught my eye and I thought it was worth responding to keep the discussion flowing on my end and maybe clarify a few points and add to it as well from that first video. So the comment came from Bell1 and it had a lot of upvotes, so it was definitely a sentiment that a lot of people felt. He said, should we balance civs or should we balance units? The dev team prioritizes balancing civs, so a mediocre civ is given a strong unit to make it competitive. I think Hera missed that point. He pointed out balance from a unit perspective, but didn't reference the more holistic civ balance. His examples of Magyar and Turk CA are so hard to get to, and the civs are very military focused with bad economies that it really isn't a problem. And even after all of that, both units trade awfully in terms of cost with skirms. The video is interesting but mostly misses the mark. So firstly, I do appreciate that he watched the entire video and even responded to certain examples that I gave in that video. It really makes it easy for me to respond and kind of see exactly where his point comes from. And I think he raises a very good point that will be the topic of today's video. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that my first video wasn't necessarily tackling balance as a whole in Age of Empires. It was rather tackling just one aspect of it, which was power creep. And truthfully, even this topic I didn't tackle in its entirety. It was really just a pattern that I noticed that seems to be more prevalent in the later DLCs, where stacking bonuses and techs onto one unit for certain civilizations with no downside was becoming a trend, and I considered that to be quite problematic. Now, to tackle the comment directly, I would say that overall we should balance the civs first and foremost around the civ itself and not around specific units. And I think the reason is pretty simple, and Bell1 certainly understands this too. If we focus most of our balance on the units specifically, then for example one civilization gets an eco bonus whereas the other one doesn't, then it's quite clear what would happen if those civs match up. The one with the eco bonus would just pull way too far ahead, and the one without an eco bonus would not have a military strength or a very strong unit to lean on to kind of swing the momentum back in the later stages of the game. So by focusing the balance on the civs, we would give certain civilizations a strong economy and moderate units. Take for example things like Vikings, Bengalis, and Malians. All these civilizations have fantastic economies with multiple economy bonuses or very strong economy bonuses, but all lack in the unit department, either by missing certain key units or by not having the strongest units late game. And on the other hand, we have certain civilizations that have very strong units but a moderate economy. Take for example Magyars, Berbers, and Bulgarians that all have very strong units and very strong late games but lack solid or proper economy bonuses. Now overall, this is definitely good game design, and this is how I believe overall the AoE2 team is handling it. They are balancing the civs as a whole and not just specific units of the civilizations. However, I don't think that's the end of the discussion. I don't think that we should only balance civs alone and not worry about specific units, because there comes a point where we have units that are way too strong, and there also comes a point where we have economies that are also way too strong. Like there's definitely the tipping point to where a unit is strong enough to be like, okay, it's balancing the fact that the civilization does not have a strong economy, and so therefore it's okay for the unit to be strong. And then if you go past that point, it's like, okay, well, it doesn't have a good economy, but if they get to this unit, then there's nothing you can really do about it and they're going to take over the game. And I really think that there's been two main trends that have become popular over the last few years that absolutely fit into the power creep theme of the initial video, and I think that because of this, largely my point still stands. Although perhaps, I should have used some different examples. That I definitely concede. When it comes to the examples of Magyars and Turks that I used in the first video, I honestly definitely agree with Bell1's point. These civilizations are balanced not from the unit, but from the fact that, in the case of Magyars, there's no solid economy bonus, and in the case of Turks, they have a small economy bonus, but they're also lacking heavily in the trash unit department. So having very strong gold units is kind of their identity, and as it turns out, both of those units are quite balanced with regards to their civs. So they're really not as problematic as some of the other examples I gave. Interestingly though, both Magyars and Turks come from some of the earlier DLCs and earlier expansions, and I believe it was the Forgotten Empires that introduced some new civilizations and gave civilizations old and new access to a Castle Age unique tech. And so that's where the Turk CA came from, and that's also where the Magyar CA came from. At least I believe that's what happened. I wasn't really playing HD at that time, so I'm not sure of the exact dates and exact history, but I believe that's kind of how it went down. And so while they have really strong units, they were held back by some other disadvantages that were built into the Civ and not built into the unit. And honestly, at this point, I still consider this good game design. Actually, I consider it great game design because it gives access to really strong units that are very fun to play with, but it's not easy to get to. So as a player, you feel very rewarded when you do get there, and it's not going to be every game that you do in fact get there. It's also true that these units trade awfully against skirms, although I would say that that's not entirely true when you consider compositions. Like Magyars and Turks-CA are not going to be fighting skirms. You're usually going to have a Hussar meat shield. So I don't think it's as clear cut as, okay, you know, you still have a counter. The skirms will be able to trade very well against them, but at least that skirms can deal with the units. So at least there's some units that can deal with Magyar CA and Turk CA. So really the balance is largely intact when you consider these two units with regards to the Civ as a whole. However, as I mentioned earlier, there are two trends that kind of break this rule and break this balance, and they're both seen in recent years. Now, the first trend is strong units plus strong economy. In this case, the units are very, very strong and hard to deal with, and they also belong to civilizations with a strong economy. And the second case is units that is so strong that you have to play it or else your Civ is useless. On a similar note, the unit could be so strong that other Civs don't have a counter once it hits the field. And I'll give some examples of both of these, and we'll start with the first case. As we mentioned earlier, Magyars and Turks have some clear disadvantages associated with the civilization, and this feels fair, and it feels like every civilization is aware of the threat of the late game Turks and Magyars and has fair and decent counterplay leading up to that late game. However, in recent years, we have a couple civilizations that don't really feel as fair to play against, and those are Persians and Hindustani. Those are two Civs that kind of break this rule of a strong late game unit, but hard to get to. Persians have the Savar, and Hindustani have the hand cannoneer and the Imperial Camel that both kind of fit into this category. And once again, this is caused by the initial power creeping pattern that I noticed and I made that first video about, where those units have stacked bonuses directly on them without having any downside, without losing any upgrades from the blacksmith or anywhere else. So to start with Hindustani, the hand cannoneer, we already addressed this largely in the first video, but basically they have full upgrades. They also get a Civ bonus and a unique tech on them, giving them 9 range and a ton of armor in late game, making them extremely hard to deal with, and they don't really have a clear counter. Some soft counters like skirms could be okay. Siege onagers don't really work unless you're Koreans or Mongols or something, you know, specific, and you know, you're kind of just left with cavalry trying to surround them, and that's like your only way to kind of guarantee that you can take them out. And in that case, you run into Hindustani camels, which are generic fully upgraded camels that also get a bonus, you know, Civ bonus from the start of the game that makes them attack faster, and they get a late game tech, the Imperial Camel, that buffs their stats even more. So both of these units belong to a civilization that has an eco bonus, and a very strong eco bonus at that. Having cheaper villagers from the start of the game is incredibly solid eco bonus, and Hindustani have a very high win rate on the ladder, largely because of this combination of really strong units and really good economy. And the interesting thing is that Hindustani have this pattern on 2 different units, so it's really hard to ignore, and it's kind of one of the reasons why it's my highest win rate Civ on the rank ladder at the moment. I think I have something like an 88 or 89% win rate with Hindustani, and so I'm really not saying this as like I'm complaining about it. It's just kind of hard to ignore that Hindustanis are a bit overtuned in these categories. So I guess if you want to talk nerfs, you know, obviously it's not the point of the video, but you'd either be forced to hit the units themselves to kind of lower their power, take away some blacksmith techs, which could be a similar thing to try to lower the power of those units, or you can kind of hit the economy bonus. Both of those would kind of solve this issue, but if you keep them as is, Hindustani is just bound to be a top tier civilization because of just the nature of the game. The other example I brought to the table is the Persian Savar. Now the Persian Savar have a built-in attack bonus against archers into the unit itself. Not just that though, but the upgrade is cheaper than Paladin, and the unit performs on average better than the Paladin. And on top of the attack bonus versus archers that's built into the Savar tech, the team bonus of the Persians gives them an attack bonus versus archers. And what's interesting is that when the Savar came out, they had a +3 attack built into the Savar tech against archers, and that was on top of the +2 attack that came in with the team bonus. Now if you do the math, Savar would have 18 damage, +2 from the team bonus, that's 20 versus archers, +3 from the Savar tech, that's 23. If you consider a fully upgraded generic arbalest, they have 3 melee armor and 40 HP. So 23 minus 3 is 20. That means the Savar is actually 2-hitting an arbalest. That's how they were made upon release. And I actually was the one that gave the suggestion to knock down the +3 attack that the Savar got to just +2, so that the fully upgraded arbalest would not die in 2 hits, but rather 3, and that's assuming the opponent took the time to tech fully into the armor upgrades for the arbalest. So the Savar upon release was meant to 2-hit arbalest arbalest while taking only 2 damage per shot. And if this is not a problematic unit, I really don't know what is. Like, the Civs is absolutely insane, and I think that it's still a really strong unit even after this initial nerf that I suggested, because even if they're not 2-hitting arbalest, they're still 3-hitting them like a regular paladin, but they just take so much less damage from them, making the Civs an absolutely dominant unit against any archer civ, essentially forcing them to get into halbs as soon as possible. Now, normally this would be fine to have a unit be so strong. We have stronger units in the game than the Civs, no doubt, but it's once again coming in to a civilization like the Persians, who have an incredible economy. Like, the Persian economy is probably one of the best in the game right now, getting a free villager advantage from Dark Age in most standard builds, and in booming scenarios you can be up to the Imperial Age at the same time as some of your opponents, but you just randomly have a plus 20 villager lead because your town centers are working so much faster and you're advancing to the next age a little bit faster as well. So in the case of both the Hindustanis and the Persians, you could make the argument that this is a case where you have to balance the civ and not the unit, but my point is you just have to balance one of them, right? And it doesn't really matter which direction you go for. Like, if you want to hit the economy of Hindustani and Persians, you just make them like late game powerhouses with some, bad early game or like awkward early game transitions, which is fair enough. That's also good design. That's fair play. And if you nerf the units themselves, then you kind of make them a bit more of a streamlined civilization that are like strong at different parts of the game, but they never feel overwhelming and they never feel overpowered. And I think that's also quite good game design. So regardless of which way you go, whether you target the civilization or target the units, I believe that in this case, or in these cases, they are intertwined and you just have to make a decision. Leave them as is fine. It's not horrible. Like, it's not like these two civilizations are completely unbeatable, but they definitely stand out as at least overtuned compared to some of the other civilizations on the roster. Now, in the second case, I personally believe it's bad game design to have a unit that's so strong that you have to play with it to make your civ competitive or to compete with your civilization. Similarly, as I mentioned earlier, if you have a unit that's so strong that other civs need specific or even multiple counters just to compete with you. And I'll give several examples to really push this case, and I think the most notorious one is the initial Hoofnius. The initial Hoofnius was absolutely insane. It's been tuned down as far as like overall stats, I think damage and splash damage and whatnot, but the initial Hoofnius was pretty much untouchable. When Bohemians first came out, their Hoofnius, you just couldn't engage with it using any unit in the game. Like, if they just had Halb plus Hoofnius, that was good enough to beat Arbalest, Cav Archers, Jurg Bombard Cannons, Hand Cannoneer, everything was melting. So that composition was just get to it and you win the game. And since then, it's been nerfed, which is fair enough, but to some extent, it's still impossible to deal with that combination for certain civilizations. Take, for example, Vikings versus Bohemians. Vikings would have absolutely no counter to Hoofnius in late game. It just doesn't exist. They can't go any kind of infantry because then you just get eaten by the hand cannoneer, and if you try to go for any kind of range units, the Hoofnius would usually take you out. However, in this case, because of the nerf, at least there's some counterplay for the Vikings. Like, in an open map, maybe they can start doing some raids, some siege ram flanks, on this side or that side, so it feels somewhat doable. It's not as broken as it was on release, but it's still a case where the unit is pretty strong to the point where it could be seen as problematic, at least for certain civilizations. Another example that's a bit more recent is the Khmer Ballista Elephant. Now, I believe that this unit was already extremely strong and it got a couple buffs even before the ballistic buff, so it was very strong. It was trending to be a top tier late game unit, and then very recently Ballista Elephants and Khmer Scorpions, or all Scorpions rather, in the game, got access to the tech ballistics, and so now their projectiles are working like ballistics. Now, I made a couple of videos on these already, but I personally believe that that is a very dangerous game, but it was a bit early. There were like kind of reaction videos where I was like, oof, that sounds scary, and after months of testing, I can confirm that it's absolutely scary. I'm not going to rush and say that it's absolutely overpowered and, we rush the nerfs, bring it back to how it was, because I don't even think that that's like the solution. I do like some of the changes that ballistics on Scorpions brought, kind of shook up that CA meta a little bit, made Scorpions actually a viable threat and not just a unit that you can dance around with a couple crossbows. So I do appreciate what ballistics on Scorpions has done for the game, but when you look at team games, right, and I've been playing a lot of team games on stream at mid-level, low level, whatever. If the Khmer player gets the Ballista Elephants, there's almost 0 units besides Siege Onager and maybe Monk and maybe Bombard Cannon, barely, that can deal with this unit. Like, seriously, Halbs don't cut it anymore because they get shredded because of the ballistics. You can't even like run in. Hussar, forget about it, they do nothing. Maybe Paladin's okay, but even then, like, Mass Ballista Elephant beats Mass Paladin, so you're really just left with no units that can beat the Ballista Elephants from Khmer in late game. Whereas in the past, you can kind of run around them and flank a bit more. Since they didn't have access to ballistics, now that's no longer possible. Halbs used to kind of collapse onto the Ballista Elephants from all sides. Now it's no longer possible. Ballistics is just chopping them down. So you're left with a situation that if your civilization does not get siege onager with siege engineers, it's going to be very hard to deal with ballista elephants in late game. And so this is a clear example of a unit that might be so strong that it's problematic even on its own. But unfortunately, in this case as well, Khmer have an excellent economy. So it's excellent economy plus unit that's almost unbeatable. You're definitely left with this unit dominating team games. And don't just take my word for it. You can go ahead and play ranked arena team games. You're going to find that Khmer in, I would say, over 50% of them. I think Khmer have a very high win rate there, or at least see a lot of success. And it's not just the ballista elephants. I also believe the same thing applies to Khmer scorpions, especially in team games with Celt scorpions or Roman scorpions with a Khmer ally, because the Khmer +1 range on Scorp is the team bonus. So you have 9 range scorpions that also get like other effects from Celts or Romans that shoot faster, you know, are cheaper or whatnot. And you get like combinations like this that you need bomber cannon to deal with or siege onager. And if you don't have them, you just can't fight those units. And so it's definitely a case where certain units can be too strong for their own good, regardless of how strong the Civ is and regardless of what you do with the Civ. If those units exist, they can definitely be problematic on their own. Now, obviously, we want to reward civilizations for getting to the late game powerhouses, especially civs that don't have an economy bonus or only have 1 or 2 specialties like Celt Siege, for example. But every civ should at least have a chance at beating your composition if you get there. Like, they should at least have a chance. And this is why I think that there's definitely a tipping point where you can point to a unit and say, okay, that's too strong. Like that one, civilizations just don't have a chance against it. Because if you point at a unit and say, oh, that unit's dangerous, you know, don't let them get there. If they do get there, you have a couple options, but it's gonna be tricky. You have to outplay your opponent. You have to, you know, think smart. You have to play a strong strategy in late game. You have to maybe rely on raids, you know, something like that. You have a chance, but it's not clear. I think that's fine. But if you have no chance at beating the composition and they're just creeping forward and you just can't fight it, I think that's kind of where I think there's an issue and there's a problem. So my solution to this is, you know, obviously you could tackle the civs and kind of hit their economy bonus, or you can hit the units themselves. Both of those are fine, which is why, again, in response to the initial question, I think that you start with balancing the civs, but then you also have to take a look at the units at a certain point. And so I think a solution to this issue is just giving units that are like, you know, late game powerhouses, giving them multiple soft counters. And I really like that from a game design perspective. So for example, with the case of ballista elephant, I don't want to see the ballista elephant randomly lose 100 HP and then the unit just does not function. It loses its identity as an elephant. I don't want to see that be the bandage solution that we throw on it. I'd rather see something that's a little bit more sophisticated. Like for example, giving skirms a little bit of an attack boost against them, like skirms +2 or +3 attack boost, because it is still like a ranged elephant unit. So elephant archers, for example, take bonus damage from skirms. So it kind of fits the theme a little bit in that case. And it gives civs like Vikings a chance to deal with mass ballista elephants, where, you know, it's still a chance. It's not like skirms start beating these things in mass. It's a soft counter, so it could work. You could trade cost efficiently, but it's not like a hard counter to where skirms come out and ballista elephants are sent running. So I think multiple soft counters like that, giving Habs a bit more resistance to the elephants, or maybe like taking down one attack from the ballista elephants so they don't shred Habs as fast. Things like that to give multiple soft counters to this unit, I think would go a long way and would be a really nice way to give civilizations strong late game units, but then also give other civilizations a chance to take them out if you play smart and you play tactically. And the last point I'll make is that in these cases, you have situations where the weaker late game civ would be pulling ahead. And so even when the other civilization gets to its powerhouse, the weaker late game civ has probably more economy, more pop on the field, and feels like it at least can make a push or make a play happen before things get out of hand. And I really think that that would be like pretty much perfect design if done correctly. Obviously, I don't have all the answers, but that would be the trend that I'd want to see. So overall, guys, I wouldn't say that AoE2 balance is bad. I think it's actually quite good, with the only exception being those power creeping trends that I'm noticing. Still, even in its current situation with those trends happening, I don't think that it's the biggest issue. However, it could become one in the future if these trends continue. And with the topic of should we balance civs or should we balance units, I think that the conclusion drawn from this video is that overall we should definitely balance civs. And there's so many more videos I can make on civ balance as a whole. I personally love the topic. I think it's fun to talk about, but definitely it should be civs first. However, I do think that balancing units and thinking about how strong an individual unit is still an important consideration, and definitely not something that you can just chalk under the table and something that, you know, is more or less an afterthought. I do think it's a very important part of game design that needs to be kept in check as well. So it's a bit of both. We start with the balancing civs in like an 80%, and then the 20% is left to balance individual units. Also, when I was browsing some of the comments on that Reddit thread, I did notice that someone pointed out that a lot of the points I make are a bit watered down because of the language I use, like always using words like broken and words like overpowered can be be a bit like, hard to engage with when it comes to discussion, because I'm kind of like giving a blanket label to everything that's even slightly strong. I think that's mainly, a lot of people chalk that up as like me trying to clickbait or something. Guys, clickbait is reserved to the title and thumbnail only. I think that's mainly due to just my limited vocabulary. But going forward, it was a very good point. Going forward, I will try to kind of elevate the vocabulary a little bit and try to use different words. And even in this video alone, I had to kind of remake a couple segments because I was using the words broken. So it's gonna be a lot of rewiring that needs to take place for me, but it's definitely something I'll work on based on that feedback. But yeah, overall, that's the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Feel free to give me your thoughts once again in the comments here or on Reddit again regarding this video, or kind of bring up some other points that I might have missed, or respond to some of the points I made. I honestly like genuinely love having these discussions, and I think they lead to very, very nice videos. So thank you so much for watching those on YouTube. I really appreciate you guys sticking around and listening to me blabber about Age of Empires 2 balance for 20 minutes. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Do let me know in the comments below if you guys are keen on these balance videos and these discussion videos. I personally love them. Feel free to let me know your opinion down below when it comes to civ balance, unit balance in this game. And if you guys want to see more content from me, check me out on Patreon and Twitch. Patreon for the exclusive guides and content, and Twitch for the live streams. Links to both in the description. And as always, have a great rest of your day, and peace.